Welcome to the OIS podcast. Today, we're presenting a meeting of the minds on drug delivery. Recorded during the OIS Drug Delivery Innovation Showcase, the panel includes an all-star lineup of clinical, industry, and VC leaders. They discuss new and emerging innovations, as well as how these innovations aim to improve the lives and vision of patients. With that, I'll turn it over to panel moderator and biotech entrepreneur, Sharon Bakalash.
Many thanks for all the presenters. You've done a fabulous job. For the panel discussion, we are joined by representatives from multiple aspects of our industry: strategic pharma companies, mid-sized companies, venture capitalists, and a physician representation. So I will let the panel members introduce themselves. I suggest that we start clockwise. So Rob, feel free to take it away.
Thanks, Sharon. Hopefully the OIS audience is relatively familiar with me, since it appears that I can't seem to keep my mouth shut any longer for OIS. But my name is Rob Rothman. I am a glaucoma specialist by training. I practice clinically. About 50 to 60% of my time is involved in the clinical management of glaucoma patients. And the rest of my time I spend running InFocus Capital Partners, which is an early stage ophthalmology investor. We typically invest in venture and seed stages. Our first fund is now closed, and we have 13 portfolio assets. And we are currently nurturing those assets and contemplating the launch of our second fund.
Thank you. Harry?
Hello, I'm Harry Stavronatis from Allergan. I am the Executive Director of Durista Marketing, located out here in Irvine, California.
Thank you. I think next one is Nancy.
Hi, Nancy Lurker. I'm the CEO of EyePoint Pharmaceuticals. We are a publicly traded company that is in the drug delivery of ophthalmology agents, primarily retina, for serious eye diseases.
And Chuck, I think that's your turn based on the algorithm here.
Hi, everyone. I'm Chuck Hess, Vice President and General Manager of our Bausch & Lomb U.S. Surgical Business. Great to be here with the group and looking forward to an active discussion.
And Casey, last but not least.
Sure. I'm Casey Kopczynski, Chief Scientific Officer of Array Pharmaceuticals, also a co-founder of the company. I helped David Epstein spin the company out of Duke University back in 2005.
Well, thank you very much, everybody, for taking the time to join in this discussion. For this discussion, I divided the topics into 4 parts so that we can touch upon this year's new developments in the drug delivery segment of the market. So the first topic is a new generation of drug delivery technologies. As we all know, a new generation is emerging: refillable, dissolvable, absorbable. New entrants to the market are upcoming this year, representing those technologies, just like Genentech's Susvimo, which is tackling novel pathway of delivery, and BNL's Xipere with suprachoroidal injection. With that said, I'm really interested to know, Rob, from your perspective as a physician, what would those new drug delivery systems create in the clinic? Would there be new dynamics for that? Will it change anything for you?
Yeah, so obviously it's a great question. I think the whole focus of this whole discussion is on, how some of these newer drug delivery technologies will change the way ophthalmologists practice. From the clinical perspective, clearly, I'll be selfish here for a minute and focus on glaucoma. It's a fairly well-established problem that compliance with medication usage not only leads to poorly controlled glaucoma and adverse outcomes, but it's also related to every other aspect of progression of disease when we treat with medication. So, I think drug delivery for glaucoma, for example, is incredibly important in terms of improving outcomes for patients. Certainly, we've gotten our first taste of viable drug delivery from Allergan and Durista, which I'm sure Harry will go into a little bit more later on. but the ability to control intraocular pressure without having patients take eye drops is sort of a holy grail. And if we can do it in a non-surgical fashion, and avoid some of the morbidities associated with invasive intraocular surgery, then we certainly, change the way patients are treated. My understanding, and at least having patients in, seeing my retina colleagues every 4 to 6 weeks for injections, certainly newer therapies to extend treatment duration of, current therapies for wet AMD and diabetic retinopathy, are certainly going to make their lives better and hopefully improve outcomes as well. And not just from the perspective of patient convenience, but from, for the ability for these patients to do better over time, improve quality of life, and hopefully improve vision. I think the biggest challenge, and one that we hopefully will address today, is how do we monitor these patients when they're out of our offices? So we're going to be giving patients these medical therapies in a slightly invasive but longer acting fashion. And what are we going to do to make sure that these therapies are both maintaining their efficacy and doing what they're supposed to do over time? And I think that's a question that has to be answered by this group, because it's great if we can say to a patient, here's something that's going to last for 6 months or 9 months or a year, but how do we know that we're actually taking care of those patients and not just sending them off into the wilderness? So I think the dynamic in the clinic is sort of yet to be fleshed out, but there's no question that extending treatment duration is going to be beneficial. And I think that hand in hand with that will be the development of technologies to allow us to monitor our patients better while they're not having to come into the office.
And in that respect, and again, the question is for all of you, but I feel maybe, Chuck, you can shed a little bit more light on that. Would the dynamics between outpatient care and maybe surgical or OR dependent administration change? Would that dynamic change and affect anything in your day-to-day life?
Yeah, I think this is a really great question. And, I think this is really the challenge that we all face in each of our businesses is really how do we maximize the opportunity to deliver these treatments and do so in an environment that is conducive to the patients actually participating in the process. And I think, the surgical implantation of devices, I think, the opportunities to provide longer duration of treatments in the office, I think are all things that we all are looking at. And I think from our perspective, just thinking about, the latest technology that we're excited to bring to the market with XIPERE, we're really using and leveraging the suprachoroidal space. It's never been done before in this modality. And I think it's really exciting for us to really look at things that we can do, not so much in the OR, because let's face it, there's not a lot of ORs to allow us to treat the volume of patients that we need to globally. And I think that's really the opportunity that we all ought to be thinking about as we're traversing this whole space of ensuring compliance, ensuring that we have patients that are adhering to our treatment regimens, no matter what it exists, if it's a 6-month duration or if it's an annual administration of a drug or what have you. I think we really need to look at how do we bring the technology to the patient and do that in the clinic, wherever that might be. Maybe it is an OR, but maybe it's in the office. And I think that's where we as an industry need to really look at how do we do that? And I think, Rob, your comments are spot on. It's really, once these patients leave, how do we make sure that they're coming back and accepting the treatments that are going to save their vision, that are going to keep their pressures low, that are going to treat their uveitis? I think those are the things that we really need to be thinking about as industry is how do we bring the patient back in for the normal routine care, whether it be repeated injections or a longer period. So those are some of the things that we're thinking about.
Yeah, I think these are all valid questions. Nancy, I want to bring it back to EyePoint, where you have had the track record with drug delivery modalities in the market. You have the perspective of time on this. Considering that, this dynamics in the market and the refillable, dissolvable, absorbable, the next gen type of thing, do these represent a new bar for existing technologies?
Well, first, absolutely they do. And I think it's going to require a paradigm shift in how the community, physicians and patients, think about treating these diseases. I agree completely with what Rob and Chuck have said, because we have, as an example, we've got YUTIQ on the market. YUTIQ is for posterior segment uveitis. It's once every 3 years. That's a long time. So how do you make sure these patients keep coming back in? There are ways to do that, but it takes time. Second of all, when you look at, let's just call most of these treatments, I think, are aiming for 6 months, right? Susvimo is at 6 months. We've got a drug going into phase 2 for 6 months. So there's others 4 to 6 month time periods for these retinal eye diseases. Glaucoma, I think there's some in development as well. And what you have to do is, in some cases, you need to think about that these patients still need to come in, maybe not once every month, but they still need to come in probably at a minimum once every 3 months, even if you can get them extended out to a longer period of time. Certainly, we've seen this with YUTIQ for uveitis. So they still need to come in. But what needs to change is not every time they're going to need to have a retreatment. It may mean that they are being monitored, and then the doctor just continues to see them until he or she feels that they need to get retreated. That's the paradigm shift that's going to occur. In some cases, too, you're going to be looking at what I'll call semi-combination therapy. You might have the background therapy that's there, while you may need an occasional booster to keep them under control. So that's what's going to be the change. And then realizing that just because, let's just take retina, if you get a little bit of extra fluid in a wet AMD patient, doesn't necessarily mean that you got to treat them right away, because with the current therapies, they start to get fluid back. Treatment is, the current anti-VEGFs are gone. So you re-inject. Now, when you've got these other treatments that are there in the background, you may not need to automatically re-inject. Now it is, okay, wait a minute. Let me wait a couple months, see if that fluid maintains and grows, or does it dissipate again? We're certainly seeing this in our phase 1 data. There have been some other examples. I think that Genentech saw this in their phase 3. You might get a little bit of recurrent fluid, but then it fades away. So there's a paradigm shift that has to occur. That's going to take some education, frankly, I think more clinical work to really play out what does this all mean.
And I think we're in complete agreement with regards to retina, but what happens in glaucoma? Harry, would you mind, considering Durista, enriching us with maybe the nuances between retina and glaucoma in that manner? Are glaucoma patients less sensitive to that? Or are they more sensitive to that?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of similarities, right? You're talking about two chronic diseases or disease states that really just require care over time. So when you talk about sensitivity, I just want to make sure I'm understanding you, Sharon. What is the sensitivity you're referring to?
With regards to the changing dynamics between patient follow-up and patient care.
Sure. So in regards to patient follow-up, it's quite similar to what physicians have always done, right? When you think about the types of relationships that doctors who treat chronic diseases, whether they be glaucoma or retina diseases, they have a special relationship with those patients, and they're used to seeing them regularly. And, Rob talked about some of the challenges that these patients face. And, Durista, is the first entrant in the market when we think about IOP lowering, but it's an opportunity to give that patient sustained IOP lowering over time. The monitoring of that patient shouldn't really look too much different, but the reality is there's an opportunity to treat these patients in a way that we've never had before. So this is really just the first chapter in IOP lowering and sustained release, and we'll see how that continues to evolve.
Yes, absolutely. And so my next question is actually directed to all of you. What type of, maybe Rob, Casey, Chuck, Harry, if we're talking about drug delivery or new drug delivery technologies, there has been a major change, I think, with Xipere and with Acivmo. But are we looking at additional drug delivery technologies to invest in? Is this a one and done for you? How do you leverage a technology or a platform technology like the print technology to create more products? Or is this something that you are right now sitting on your current assets and letting them play out? So what's the strategic direction for each of you? And I think, I will let you interact with one another on that as well.
Yeah, I'm happy to start. Yeah, I can certainly speak with respect to ARI and our print technology. We do believe it's something that has a lot of potential moving forward to treat multiple different diseases. And we think the focus on delivering small molecules to the back of the eye, as opposed to the biologics that have typically been developed and are currently on the market, really has attractiveness because you can address disease targets that are known to be involved in the disease process, but are simply not accessible to biologics, intracellular proteins, for example. You typically cannot get a biologic inside the cell. And going back to ARI and glaucoma for a second, I mean, we do bring sort of a glaucoma focus to the retina in terms of looking at the diseases in the back of the eye and understanding that they're at least as complicated as, disease at the trabecular meshwork that causes elevated IOP. So can we really expect wet AMD to be adequately served by, primarily one drug class, anti-VEGF drug class? I think that's unlikely to be the case. Even if we can improve upon the efficacy of anti-VEGF, there's still that underlying atrophy that's likely to continue over time. So we may simply be sort of putting off the time that it takes for geographic atrophy, for example, to develop, but it will eventually come up. And so it's easy to imagine, 5 to 10 years from now, retina patients needing, 2 or 3 different treatments, sometimes in combination, to adequately control their disease, much as we do with elevated IOP and glaucoma. And that's where I think the having access, the ability to address multiple different types of targets becomes important for combining different modalities and have the ability to have more sustained delivery of the drug, less frequent injections. Because if a patient now has to be on 2 or 3 different intravitreal injections, certainly you want those individual injections to be, relatively infrequent, once every 6 months, maybe even once a year would be preferable if you have 2 or 3 different products that are being injected into the same patient.
Chuck, what about BNL? Are you looking at other things, or are you sitting on Xipere now?
No, we're not sitting. We're not sitting on our assets, as you mentioned before. I think what we are doing, though, is we're looking at opportunities to explore different types of treatment modalities. And I think everyone's probably aware of our work that we're doing currently with Eyenovia, which I think is very exciting. Addressing childhood myopia with a technology that will allow us to get the drug to the patient with minimal discomfort and and I think those are some of the things that I think are exciting about it. It's not just necessarily long duration of the product, but also a more efficacious delivery of the drug. And I think those are areas that we're also excited about as well. I think Casey mentioned a little bit about small molecule. We introduced our Lotomax small molecule product as well. And we're finding that, we're able to achieve twice the penetration of the drug. And I think those are some of the things that we all ought to be, really thinking, more specifically about is the types of delivery of these products. I think are really the opportunity that we have to ensure the efficacy of our treatments.
Sharon, I'll jump in here. You had asked, is this a one and done? And I could say for Allergan, that is an emphatic no. So we are committed to this space. We are committed to drug delivery. And when you think about even Durissa's journey, this is a product that was developed within the four walls of Allergan. It took 15 years to get it to market. So we're just getting started. So it's exciting. And it's when we think about, the future of drug delivery, I think, there could be a day where a physician could reach into their cabinet or to their refrigerator and pull out one of any different type of molecules that can be injected into the eye to help patients with chronic diseases. So, like anything else, you always try to make improvements. And when you think about the future of drug delivery, it's how do we make it better? When you think about products that they're QID, we want to make them TID. Once they're TID, we want to make them BID. And, there's always things that can be done in the space. So it's really just about advancing the platform from here on.
Well, thank you very much. I think we're up to the second point of our discussion. And I think this last take-home message that we discussed leads us directly to that, because we all know that the lion's share of the drug delivery scene is in the retina space, second only to glaucoma and inflammation are secondary to that as far as the market share of that. But we recently are seeing new areas that are being looked at, such as the childhood myopia, such as allergy, and so forth. And I think in that respect, we're looking forward to hearing from you, Rob. What unmet needs exist that needs to be conquered by drug delivery? What trends do you see where you're focusing either on smaller markets or even different markets that are not necessarily smaller from a physician's perspective, from a clinician?
Yeah, I think I'm going to give you both the physician and the investor perspective. It's, I think
even better.
I wear slightly different hats when I view these things. It's hard to separate them sometimes, but first of all, there are drug delivery technologies out there. We have drug delivery, right? So, and we have some of the representatives from those companies on the phone, right? We have DexiQ, which is technically a drug delivery, right? We're delivering steroid long-term in the eye. We have Durista, which is delivering, bimatoprost, long-term into the eye. We have punctal plug delivery systems from companies like Ocular Therapeutics. We have, a lot of technologies that already exist to try and deliver drugs differently. And I think the point of that is that there is going to be a continued and prolonged attempt to try and make the delivery of pharmaceuticals to the eye for patients with ocular disease more efficacious and easier. That's the bottom line. This has to be a continued process because in every disease state in ophthalmology, compliance is the biggest problem. And as much as I love my patients, they're horrible, right? They're just horrible at taking drugs. And, I again, not to sort of beat up ophthalmology and glaucoma in general, but, with the exception of Rho kinase inhibition in the form of Rhopressa, we're pretty much using drugs that we've had for 20 or 30 years and still making patients take them 2-3 times a day. It's sort of nonsensical when you think about how difficult it is for patients to do that. So I think regardless of the ophthalmic disease state, we're going to be using pharmaceuticals to treat these diseases because there are great pharmaceuticals and the advances in pharmaceutical technology are incredible. And I can say that from both the clinical and the investor perspective. The question is that if we can't get them or get patients to use them correctly, they're not going to work, right? And that's the fundamental problem here. And that's one of the biggest reasons that patients have surgery in my clinic is because the medications aren't working, and not necessarily because they're not working, it's because they're not being used. And I think it's the same thing with any topical delivery. It's sort of comical when you think about, glaucoma doctors are trying to find ways to get patients off drops, and retina doctors are trying to find ways to get patients on drops. And you're trying to think about the best way to treat these diseases, but ultimately we need to take the patient out of the equation, right? They have to be given an opportunity to have their disease treated in a way that's simple, easy, and effective. Whether it is allergy or myopia or inflammation or glaucoma or wet AMD, dry AMD, diabetic retinopathy, whatever disease you're talking about, we're going to be using drugs, and we need to figure out better ways to get them in the eye. The market is wide open. And, from the investor perspective, we have seen so many promising delivery technologies that are getting close to maybe being ready for, investment level from, venture capital funds such as ours. We have one drug delivery asset in our portfolio that's doing very well. But the reality is that all of these technologies at the present are focused on delivering therapy. And for those of you who are at the AAO and listened to some of the presentations, the FDA is getting a little annoyed at us, continuing to look for therapies and not cures. So, we've got to sort of figure out how to balance the improved efficacy with continued FDA help in getting these technologies to market. Ultimately, we have to think about longer term ways of actually fixing disease rather than just treating it. So all of these things are out there, and all of them have to be tackled. And there is definitely an incremental stepwise improvement in duration of efficacy and our ability to get patients to take these drops. That has to continue, and it has to continue ultimately until we get to the point where, for the Holy Grail perspective, we give patients one thing one time and it treats them or cures them. And, that's where we have to end up one day.
Fair enough. I'm going to ask Nancy, from your perspective, and again, this is probably a question to all of you, so I'm going to let Nancy start and then feel free to chime in. There are limiting factors for adoption of drug delivery technologies. From your experience, what minds should we avoid? What barriers to entry with regards to adoption exist for drug delivery, and what do you think we should do about those?
Well, if you don't mind, I'm going to add on to what Rob is saying, because I think one thing that the audience needs to understand, I think a lot of people do, certainly in the ophthalmology community, but even beyond that, maybe for investors who may not be completely conversant in this space, we've got a tsunami of patients that are going to crash into the available number of providers. And it's a real problem. And I think that's why there's such a high need for this, because you literally cannot have these patients coming in every month, every other month, whatever it is today, to get this chronic treatment on such a short time period. It's not sustainable. I think FDA certainly recognizes that. We certainly can see that in some of our interactions with them. Everybody, this is from CMS to FDA to the providers, want to see this extended treatment period, not only for compliance, but just because to manage it in the system. So as to the paradigm that needs to change, look, and I've worked in the industry for many, many years, and I've been in multiple therapeutic areas. And so there's some basic paradigms that are consistent across therapeutic areas. One, physicians tend to be inherently conservative, and I would say for good reason. Safety first, right? First and foremost, you've got to keep the patient safe. So doctors want to take time to see that these new treatment paradigms work. So that's number one. But if you add that in, that you've got to have additional data. That's why I keep stressing that. I think it's up to us, the manufacturers, to make sure that we are providing not only the basic phase 3 studies, but additional ongoing phase 4 studies to get the community comfortable with how you use these different treatments. I give you one case. In our case, multiple injections. If you're going to do a once every, in our case, 6-month implant, what does it look like once you add the second and third implant? And these dissolve over time, but nevertheless, what does that look like? What does it look like when you have to give an occasional booster? All that, you're going to need the data to get the community comfortable and used to using these new treatments. So I think that's first and foremost, making sure the data is there to support the use. Number 2, educating. And then number 3, we have to get the payers comfortable as well. That's a heavy lift, and I think all of us combined can make that happen. It's not one single company. It's got to be a number of the companies that are all out there helping to get the community and the patients comfortable that, yes, you can go beyond the current paradigm treatment. It takes time. It's a technology shift. Anytime you're doing a technology shift, it just takes time and data.
Yes, absolutely.
I'm just going to pipe in there with one comment, Nancy, because I agree with you 100%. And from the clinical perspective, I spend, 3 days a week, seeing patients. It has been incredibly challenging to convert people from drop therapy to implantable therapy. So Durysta, I think, is a fantastic product. And, I made a comment, one of the early marketing pre meetings for Durysta about how many of my patients, or what percentage of my patients would be appropriate for a product like Durysta. And the answer is 100%, right? Every single patient would benefit from something. I think Harry will probably be happy to tell you it's not 100%. And the problem is that getting patients to make this change, to make them understand that, hey, this is an opportunity for us to get you off of topical therapy. But more importantly, this is the way we're going to be treating disease in the future. We're not going to be using drops one day. We're going to be using things like this, and making people understand that it is a Herculean task. And it's a conversation with every single patient, and some people will benefit from it and some people will not. And this is just one drug replacement at the moment. We need to be able to replace multiple drugs and have different delivery systems. It is incredibly challenging to get this paradigm shift to occur. It was a little bit different, I think, with the anti-VEGFs, because we had nothing and now we had something. With glaucoma, for example, we have drops that work really well. They're a pain in the neck and patients are bad at taking them, but ultimately they were working. Now we want you to take them less and let us do this minor little procedure in the office that, is really, really safe, and yet still patients are resistant. So it's a huge problem. And I'm sure, the payer process was interesting for Allergan, and I'm sure it's going to be interesting for everybody who wants to move into these longer term delivery systems. But the reality is that ultimately, you're right, it's better for the patients, and we have to figure out how to get them to accept this shift. It's not easy.
And Rob, while I appreciate the plug here, I cannot comment any further. I'm restricted to a comment on the percent of patients that it's appropriate for. But to that end, and all jokes aside, I think when physicians start getting used to intracameral delivery, or just even delivery into the eye in general, I think now we're seeing it in retina. We've seen it there for years. We've seen it in cataract surgery. We're seeing it now in glaucoma. So across multiple disease states, physicians are getting the opportunity to try these technologies and have an opportunity to really embrace them. So I do think that it's important that companies like Allergan, like EyePoint, and Ari, I know you guys are trying to get into the space as well. I mean, the more noise that there's out there and the more the physicians see that these therapies can be safe and also efficacious, that's what really starts to turn the paradigm. But Nancy, you hit the point, spot on. It takes time. It takes time and it takes data, and it just takes us this comfort that will come, but we'll get there.
Well, I appreciate the recommendation for data and time, because those are always things that are needed for education of the market. But as an advice for those who are starting to commercialize, right, with Xipere, with Susvimo, what would be your recommendations to them? And that's for all. Casey, maybe you should start. Just for the heck of it.
Yeah, since we are still, well, I should say we're not on the market yet with a sustained release product. I can only draw from our glaucoma topical drop experience, and to say that early engagement with payers, absolutely critical. Can't overstate that enough. As much as we may not like it, the payers are becoming more and more dominant in terms of how medicine is practiced, and designing studies to show that there is some benefit beyond what they could consider to be convenience for the patient, I think is going to be absolutely critical. They will not pay for convenience. And understanding the market, understanding who the payers are going to consider to be your comparables, and then working with them early to understand what it's going to take to convince them, I think will be key.
Fair enough. Nancy, any recommendations from your end? Considering you have a few products in the market in that arena?
I would say, again, these are savvy companies, they're very savvy. So I'm sure they're all over this, but health economics data. You just, you have to have it with ICER and everything else. And I would also add, if I could put just a plug in, I think the more that we can expand how we think about health economics, there's some interesting paradigms out there now, or I should say modalities about how you think about health economics. It's got to go beyond just the traditional look. It's got to look at the impact overall on society, caregivers, ability to work and be a productive member of society. We don't take that into account. And then also, I might add, looking at the impact, in some ways very positive, of generics down the road and taking all that into account. That's not been traditionally incorporated into health economics. We need to start doing that because we're being short-sighted if we don't take all that into account. Unfortunately, the payers typically have a 2 to 4 year time period because that's the average life cycle of a patient in their plans. So that's what they focus on. That doesn't help society overall. I think CMS can take the lead, and I think the major manufacturers can take the lead in really starting to look at a broader view about how we look at these treatments and the advances that were being made.
Harry, any insights from your neck of the woods?
Yeah, I think, look, it's a collaborative effort. I think first you got to train your sales force. You got to make sure that they understand your data. They have a way to educate physicians so that they're at ease. It's also good to have medical support out there should questions arise that are beyond the scope of a representative. And then even having things like support, we start talking about the buy and bill space. We start talking about reimbursement. A lot of practices have never done this before, right? So unless you're involved in a large specialty practice, this might be something that's completely new to you. So to have that type of support and to have that, multiple layers of support. So it's not just a clinical thing. There's some medical, there's some reimbursement involved. These are all things that practices need help with. So, really take your time with each facet of this because it's more than just, showing up with some data. There's a lot of other pieces that come into play.
Fair enough. So, gentlemen and lady, we are at the last group that we're going to be looking at, and that is titled Thinking Interdisciplinary. And I want to take advantage of the combination here in the panel where we have diverse representations from multiple disciplines. We have large and medium-sized companies. We have a VC representative. We have a physician. We have a marketing specialist. So for those who are listening, the question number one would be, how and when do you harness input from physicians during the development process of a drug delivery? I would like to ask all of you as companies, putting your VC hat, Rob, is going to be a key here as well.
Sharon, if I can add to this and speak up, I would say all the time. Some of the biggest mistakes that companies have made is they don't listen to the customer. And in our case, really the customer is the physician. And if you're not listening to what they want, you're going to make a lot of mistakes as you come to market. So you start early, you embed that into your clinical programs and get that information built in early.
Absolutely. Chuck, how do you do this at BNL?
Yeah, I think Nancy, you're absolutely correct, and I also think that one of the areas that we're really highly focused in, and we do this across all of our businesses, not only in drugs and drug delivery, but also in our medical device businesses as well. Is we bring physicians to the table and really explore the unmet needs, more specifically around patient engagement. And a lot of what we've found through our work is really, the lack of knowledge within the physician community around how to adopt these technology. I think, Harry, you hit this on the last question, which is really important. A lot of the effectiveness is how well your staff is embedded in the process as well. So it's not only physician engagement, but it's all medical practice participants, and then the other part of it that I think is incredibly important, and I know, patient compliance is really what we're trying to solve with a lot of the talk of these technologies, but how do we turn the patient into an advocate for their own care? And I think some of these are opportunities that we can look outside, drug delivery and look at technology in general, and how those play a role in engaging patients in their own care. I know every day that I end the day, I'm looking at my watch and figuring out how many steps I've taken, and did I get my stand goal? But ultimately, that's what this is all about. It's getting the patients engaged in making sure their drops are administered on a timely basis, and giving them status updates. And I think those are really important aspects of the whole environment of drug delivery and drug management for these patients. So I think those are some of the things that I think are really important as we really look at proliferating these technologies throughout the community.
Chuck, you're cracking me up because, we think about patient advocacy. We did a lot of this work as we were looking to launch Durista. And when we looked at patient groups around glaucoma and support groups, there were more groups about people whose dogs had glaucoma than actual patients with glaucoma. So I think when you think about feedback, it's not just about us getting feedback on products. It's about us, asking physicians, how can we help you and how can we help your patients, right? So information comes in many different ways, but I think truly understanding the needs of the patients and the challenges that the physicians are up against is totally important and something that we need to continue to focus on.
I think Chuck and Harry and Nancy have really covered it. I mean, no question. The earlier you can engage the physicians, seek their insight into what the unmet needs are, the better. And then early and often. I think would summarize it best.
Yeah, and I'll again stick my venture capital hat on here and my clinical hat and say that obviously I think physicians are a hugely valuable source of information when trying to plot out a strategy, right? As Nancy stated, we're technically the consumer, right? Patients aren't going to get something that we don't recommend ultimately. The problem is that most doctors, I think, unfortunately, have no idea how complicated and challenging it is to take a product from the conceptual stage into something that's FDA approvable. Now, I've had a painful and grueling insight into that process as a venture capital investor in ophthalmology. And it's very easy to sit around and say, hey, this is a great idea. You guys should make this. And I see the corporate wheels start spinning around and thinking, well, that's $250 million in 6 years worth of work. We're not going to do that right now. We've got other priorities. But so there's this mismatch between, I think, a little bit of what we all think is a great idea and what's feasible to achieve. And it's complicated from the investor level. It's even more complicated because, and again, not to tout what I do as a venture capitalist, but we're sort of a funnel, right? We see, InFocus has been around for 3 years. We've made 13 investments and we've evaluated almost 300 companies. And being able to try and understand which one of those companies deserve funding in a particular discipline, whether it's drug delivery or not, is challenging. We have to consider all of these issues, clinical need, regulatory and clinical trial process, and an eventual, corporate involvement and potential, exit into the market. And it's daunting, right? So doctors are great for giving ideas, but it's really going to take smart business people to figure out how to make it a reality. I think everybody in this panel who is, part of our corporate partnership, would be able to tell you what their dream product is and what their holy grail type product is. And yet I don't think anybody's really got it yet. Or if they do, they're trying to figure out how to pay for it and how to get it to the market in a way where it's affordable, and thinking about the regulatory challenges and thinking about, who's going to pay for it. It's just an unbelievably challenging process. And I love my physician colleagues, and I've been fortunate enough to surround myself and InFocus with people who make me look like the dumbest guy in the room. And I love that. But ultimately, even though we have all these great ideas, it's not so easy. So I think it's important to get doctor input, but I think it's just important to have smart corporate partners who understand the process, because they're going to really figure out how to take these things to the next step.
So Rob, is there any additional ways to include physicians' input? Is there a stage that's too early to include their input?
Well, again, I think that every company has a non-disclosable and non-public, sort of manifesto that sort of says this is what we want to invest in over time, and this is what we want to see ourselves involved with down the road. And I think they put that in play with a combination of both internal and external development, right? They'll build products internally and they'll acquire assets that they think meet that manifesto. And I think it's up to them to then go out and either get those ideas from doctors or seek validation that they're on the right track. So I don't think there's ever a point in time when it's too early. I think there's definitely a time when it's too late, for sure. But I don't think there's ever a time that's too early. But I have to say, and including the group of people on here, it's unbelievable how many really bright people work inside of ophthalmic corporate, pharma and technology. And you guys all have done a great job of bringing products to market that have really helped me and my colleagues treat disease better. And I think that the most sort of fulfilling aspect of what I do as an investor is to work with companies that are as motivated as we are to find better technology for patients. So I think that, asking doctors what they want and sort of helping to build that manifesto is important. I think that getting physicians involved to help either create clinical trials or test ideas or sort of execute early development activities is a great idea. I think engaging with high quality physicians when it comes to conducting research to figure out, do clinical trials, if these things are effective, I think you need that input along the way. I think it needs to be part of the process from the beginning. And then obviously you need their support when you release the product. So I think it has to be there in every aspect. And I think that all of our corporate partners, including those here, know who those high quality physicians are to ask. And I think that they've gotten really good advice and will continue to get it because they're seeking it out.
Thank you. So I think we'll summarize this panel with one question that can be left open, but I do encourage you to just give me a one sentence for summary. And that would be, if we sit here in a year time, not long from now, what would be the drug delivery scene? What would it look like? What's next for drug delivery? So if you can summarize, distill something that is the next big thing, please feel free to do so. Who wants to start?
I'll start because it's obviously sort of what I do, right? So, the summary for my goals or how I'd like to see the future is I've made it a personal goal to figure out a way to practice glaucoma from the golf course. Right? I figure if I can practice glaucoma,
but that's not drug delivery.
It is. It's I need to be able to treat patients without actually having them in front of my room and monitor them and evaluate their optic nerve and visual function from a golf cart so that I can get my index into the single digits. That's the holy grail for me. But what I think is going to be happening in the next 1 year, 5 year, 10 years, I don't know what the timeline is because there's so many variables involved there. But ultimately, one day, I think people are not going to be taking drops for most of what, glaucoma gets treated with. I think that's what we're going to see. I think for, just to take it away from drug delivery for a second, I think we're going to have better surgical treatments. I think things are going to continue to improve in ways that allow patients to have lower, stable intraocular pressure for longer periods of time without relying on them to put drops in their eyes. I think that's what we will see.
So dropless treatment.
Well, medical therapy, but hopefully dropless, yes. I don't think we're going to ever get away from medical therapy, but I would love for it to be dropless.
Great.
Sharon in retina.
It's all about glaucoma for me, by the way, so I'm going to let the rest of people talk about retina.
Yes.
I'll comment on retina. I think hopefully you'll see home OCT monitoring, which I think is going to be a major, major advancement in getting patients to be able to monitor their central subfield thickness at home, coupled with potentially faricimab hopefully will be approved, which is once every 4 months. I think that's a big advancement, and then others getting filed. So I think that you'll see over the next year, and potentially it'll be 2 years out, some significant advances. And I think all that coupled with Susvimo is going to start to change this treatment paradigm in retina. I think it's very, very exciting time right now.
Great. Thank you. Who's next?
I'll jump in. I think continued improvements in imaging of the retina and the application to glaucoma, and ultimately enabling glaucoma neuroprotection trials. Maybe not a year away, but it is advancing very rapidly, and it's something that's absolutely needed. It's still going to be a challenge to get FDA to accept a structural biomarker for glaucoma. But even if it's not an FDA acceptable endpoint, just allowing companies to begin to test treatments based on some output that is more reliable, more consistent than visual fields, would allow us to take a very big step forward to at least starting to test potential neuroprotection agents in the back of the eye.
Thank you.
And I'll jump in. And Rob, I hope that one day you could fulfill your dream of treating patients from the golf course. It's going to be a lot easier than what you do now, which is have them meet you there. So hopefully Sustained Delivery will help with that.
I need someone to carry my bag, Harry.
I got your back, buddy. But but we think about the space, and while we're so excited about DURYSTA, this is just the first chapter in Sustained Delivery and glaucoma. So I think it's exciting that there's going to be more products, more attention, more focus on this. And I think competition is a fantastic thing for the space. I think it motivates us. I think it helps us do ultimately what's right for the patient and come up with even better therapies. So just really excited about the future of Sustained Delivery here.
Yeah. And Sharon, I'll just conclude by saying, I think that we're really on the cusp of seeing a transformation of the market, and all the things that Nancy and Rob and Harry and Casey you've commented on really make me incredibly optimistic about what this means for patients, not only in our developed markets, but also those markets that really require great solutions that don't have the luxury of visiting their eye care professional on a routine basis. And I think that's really where the excitement for me is with all of these new modalities, these new treatments, is to see the proliferation of great solutions, whether they be surgical or pharmacological, throughout the globe. And I think that when we get to that point, we're going to say, wow, we've accomplished a lot of great things in this environment. So that's really kind of my vision and my hope that we see this here in the not too distant future.
Well, thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for the interdisciplinary discussion we just had with what appears to be really great visionaries in ophthalmology. One thing that I know for sure is going to happen in a year is another drug delivery symposium, and I look forward to having this discussion in this combination because it's just riveting. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sharon.
Thanks, Sharon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you for listening, everyone. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of the OIS podcast. Be sure to listen in next week as we discuss the latest innovations in ophthalmology with experts in science, medicine, and industry. Subscribe to our iTunes channel so you don't miss a thing. Got a story of your own to tell? Apply to be a guest at OIS.net.